there were a number of comments from people that the buyback was much more expensive than they thought. And some of them had mistaken assumptions on what they were supposed to be paying. Others were not sure what happened. So I've invited the retirement system to tell us how they're doing those calculations and what, if anything, has changed since any previous buybacks. And we will not, I hope we will not be going off onto a lot of other issues because we need to cover this one specific question. Thank you. All right, and Mr. Kavanaugh?
Thank you. My name is Mark Kavanaugh. I'm interim chief legal counsel for the retirement system. Not sure if you wanted to give me to give a brief overview, or you just want to ask questions, or how do you want to proceed?
Start with a brief overview so we know which questions to ask.
Okay. So SB 363 provides that certain Group 2 members who were in that middle tier of members who were employed on 1112 but did not have 10 years of service, and for whom the minimum years of service and age of retirement were gradually increased based on how many years of service they had at that time. This bill would allow the member to buy back as many years of service necessary to get them to be able to retire at age 45 and 20 years of service, as was the law before 2012. The law requires that the member pay the full actuarial cost of the years of service. They can buy years of service in increments of a year at a time, no partial years. And based on how many years of service they had on 1112, they can buy between 1 and 4 years of service. Whatever is necessary to either reduce their years of service or add to the years of service to get to the be able to retire to the 20 or to get their age to 45, whichever they need. And some people need the age, some people need the service. The full actuarial cost is composed of 3 elements. The largest is the fact that the members will be retiring earlier and receiving their pension for more years. That makes up about 2/3 of the cost. And the second element of the cost is the fact that by retiring earlier and not working for a couple more, 3, 4 more years, we're not receiving contributions on the pay they would have received if they had continued working to the age that they were allowed to retire under the law before the service purchase. And the last element of the cost is a risk premium that is built into at the recommendation of our actuaries, Gabriel, Roeder, and Smith. The risk premium is an additional 20%, and it is to account for 3 elements, and that is investment performance, payroll experience, and changes in actuarial assumptions such as demographics. And that is basically how we've come up with it. The statute required us to charge the full actuarial value as determined by our actuaries, and this is what they recommended. And it was adopted by the board.
Okay, thank you. When I looked at it, it appeared that by buying service, they also bought themselves a larger pension because the stair step was from 2.5% to 2% of salary.
Right.
So that even if they only bought 1 year, they were buying themselves a larger pension for the entire period. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by entire period, but I will say that the law provides that the multiplier for the year used for the years you purchased will be 2.5. Your remaining years are calculated based on where you fall in that tier. But the additional
So
years
it's
you
not,
buy.
it's not for, you aren't buying yourself up to 2.5% for the 10 years in between.
No,
Okay,
no,
thank you.
just for the 1 to 4 years you purchase would be calculated at 2.5. And this is one of the elements that challenged us technically to change our system, because our system uses the same multiplier over the whole career of an individual. This now would require us to have certain years at one multiplier and other years at a different. So there was a lot of technological challenges and programming involved.
Okay, well, thank you. That explains it to me, I think. Does anyone else have yes, Representative Schmidt and then Representative Pearson.
So I've been at this game for a number of years, as you know, and sounds very similar to the situation that we had back in the past, as you alluded to, I think. But we did away with it about 10 or 12 years ago, I think, because it was not actually equitable for the system. It was costing the system more than the people who were buying into it were actually paying. And according to what I've heard you say, it seems like you've figured out a calculation that actually does pay for itself in a way that does not harm the system. Am I correct in that understanding?
Yeah, if you're referring to the short-lived program that allowed all members to buy up to 5 years of service, the methodology, I believe, was based on contributions, and that in reality turned out to be underestimating the actual cost, and the program only was in existence for a year or so. This bill, I believe, originally was proposed with a contribution methodology of calculation, which would have had the member pay the combined employer and employee rates. But I can say during deliberations of the legislature, that was changed to full actuarial cost, because the other method, according to our actuaries, would have come up about $12 million short by their estimates, and so it was switched. But I can say that, for example, we've had 137 people apply so far. And for the police that have applied, there's 103 of them, if they had been charged based on the contribution method as the bill was originally introduced, it would have been 45.43% of their prior 12 months compensation. The actuarial method on average for the individuals who have applied so far is 46.72. So about 1.3% higher with the actuarial method than under the contribution method as originally proposed. So there isn't a significant difference between the two methodologies at this point on the average. But for particular individuals who have high compensation and are very close to retirement, their percentage cost is going to be higher because they're retiring sooner and they make more money. If the contribution method on average is very similar, but it would have spread it across the board such that members who were retiring earlier are being subsidized by members who were retiring later, and to the extent that subsidy wasn't sufficient, then the employer would be subsidizing any shortfall in the cost. So our actuaries felt that the prudent course of action was to look at the demographics and the actuarial considerations of this particular cohort of members, of which there were, I believe, 1,824 potential members who would be eligible for this benefit. That represents about 3.75% of our active membership in total. And so the actuarial assumptions look particularly at the individuals, and just by definition, if someone is buying 1 year and is now able to retire on November 1st instead of November 1st next year, that person's cost is going to be more because it's closer in time. And so you can see that the percentages vary from as low as 35% to as high as 70%, depending on the individual's situation. We feel that's a more accurate cost because it's being assessed to the individuals to whom the cost is attributable rather than on an average basis across the whole population of people who are eligible.
That certainly does sound like the equitable way to do it. You shouldn't be getting more than you're entitled to or less than you're entitled to, but the consideration and the concern we had at the time the change was made was that it was not equitable for the system. The system was wound up being harmed. We have some very experienced members, so I hope this will be pursued by some of them who have questions. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Thank you,
welcome.
Representative Pearson.
I have a couple, and I'll start with adherence, let's say, to the statute. There seems to be a strict interpretation of this piece of legislation until you get to a couple of points, i.e., we'll start with the installed payment portion, which it appears the retirement system is unwilling to comply with. As I've been told after making multiple requests up there as to what that payment method is going to look like, I was told the retirement system is not interested in implementing that portion of the statute. Is that still true?
Yes, the board has determined not to exercise its discretion under the statute to allow for installment payments. The only service purchases for which we do allow installment payments are what we call employer oversight, which is when an employer fails to enroll someone when they're first hired. One of the biggest barrier or obstacle to installment payments is the fact that if someone comes in and buys a year and retires on 11/1, over what period of time? You have to pay for it before you retire. And if we
it says
were
that.
to give someone an installment payment for his 4 years and you retire in 11/1, well, we're not going to give you the increased benefit until 4 years later when you're finished paying. Now we got to go back and recalculate and give you the money that you're owed now that you're fully paid. It just wasn't as feasible to have an installment payment for people who by definition are applying for this to retire sooner rather than later. Although I will say that many of the members that have applied, particularly those who are requesting the full 4 years, still have quite a few years to go, even with the 4 to retire. But it was the board's determination that installment payments weren't as feasible in this situation, so they decided not to exercise their discretion.
Okay, that's the first part. I think one of the things that we're also looking at here, if I'm understanding what you're telling me, is that you're looking at the employee portion, the employer portion, the UAAL portion, and then you're slapping a 20% penalty on top of all of that. Now, that is certainly, as you've alluded to, different than what was done in roughly 12 years ago. That is not how that was calculated in any way. And I don't recall a single discussion in either the House or the Senate in reference to this being done in a different manner than it was done 12 years ago. So this came as a big surprise to me. But just so I can get the clarification here, the UAAL employer penalty is part of the calculation you're using to determine what someone has to pay for a year of service.
No, I think you're mixing apples and oranges. UAAL is a portion of the employer contribution attributable to the underfunding. Employer contributions in general are split into two categories: the amount needed to fund the underfunding and the amount needed to pay for the annual accrual of this year's benefit, the normal cost. The member contributions make up about 75% of the normal cost. The employers pay the other 25% of the normal cost, and the employer contribution pays for all of the underfunding. It's a underfunding, and the UAAL is a contribution-based concept. This calculation is not based on contributions. It's based on the actuarial value. In other words, we calculate what is your pension now, what will your pension be after you purchase it? Calculate the present value of each of those, and the cost is the difference. That is that is the number on which the premium is applied. It has nothing to do with the UAAL, which is a contribution concept. It has to do with what is the difference in the present value of a member's benefit before and after the purchase. That's the dollar number against which the risk premium is assessed.
Okay, follow up. So if that's the case, I've had people send me pictures of the letter they got back from the retirement system indicating the dollar amount per year, some of which are well into six figures. And looking at what an actuarial diagnosis of someone looks at lifespan and other things is, when you got, how old you are when you got in the system, those sort of things. And doing some quick math on those, it would be impossible for the member to break even in their lifetime of what is being charged to them for this. So there's no way that you're going to pay for something to which you will never break even. That doesn't pass a sniff test with me.
Yes, Representative Pearson, I think that it'd be fair to say that it would only break even if the person were to live as long as they were expected to, plus the risk premium. So yes, if you're, it shouldn't be cheap. And when we discussed it, we said this is going to be expensive, and everyone agreed.
Sure, but I've seen numbers as high as $125,000 per year, which is atrocious to charge someone.
Representative Pearson, do you have a question, or is this a speech?
I'll get to the question part.
Thank you, please do.
Do you think, and is it of the opinion of the board of the New Hampshire retirement system, that the idea was for these members to purchase something, to enter into retirement having to fully mortgage a home and to go into massive debt just to simply get out when they were promised originally?
Oh, I can't speak to the intent of the board. I can speak to what I know. And respectfully, I think your math is incorrect. In fact, 2/3 of the cost would be recovered in the additional pension that the member would receive by being able to retire early, 1 to 4 years, depending on how many they purchase. I'll give you one example. There was a member who was concerned about the cost. He would recover 2/3 of his cost in the first year he was retired. His benefit would then be increased monthly after that, such that after 8 years of retirement, he would have recovered his full cost. The basic design of it is you are paying for an additional benefit so that over the life of your retirement, your cost will equal the extra benefit on a present value basis. So it is categorically untrue that it's impossible for someone to recover the money. In fact, mathematically, it is designed. And when the only people, in my view, that wouldn't recover the money are those who die earlier than their life expectancy.
So one last question in reference to the 103 people that applied. Those are people that applied. How many actually agreed so far to the terms that were laid forward to them?
A handful, because we just finished our programming and have just started to be able to calculate and send out bills and actually process in the system the payments. And so I checked with staff this morning. She said about 5 or 6, but we didn't have stats on that.
Okay, thank you. Representative Lekes and then Allegra.
Thank you. First part of my question was answered about the UAAL. But what I will ask is, I understand depending on how close someone is to retirement, their salary, and I'm sure other factors, how much they would have to pay is going to vary. But can you provide like 2 or 3 kind of scenarios that cover that range, what their circumstances are and what it would cost for them to buy additional years?
Well, I can't speak to individuals, particularly, but I
No.
can say that generally, one example is there's a corrections officer through a tremendous amount of overtime made $250,000 last year, and she wanted to buy 4 years, and the cost is almost $400,000 because she has such a high salary. She's buying 4 years. And that's what it costs. The cost is what the cost is. Really, what we're discussing here, I think, is who's going to pay that cost. So the cost is the number, and that's what it is. And if you were to reduce the cost for the people buying it, someone else has to pay, and that's going to be the employers.
We've gone through a bit of a maze since the question occurred to me a few minutes ago. So I may ask Representative Pearson to repeat the original question. But it occurred to me at the time to ask, is the discretion that you mentioned actually written into the statute?
Installments, I believe.
Representative, would you please repeat exactly what you were asking about?
Well, Representative Allegro, if you're referring to the installment, the payment portion, that is
Yes.
listed in the language of the statute. There's nothing listed in the statute in reference to a 20% penalty. There's nothing listed in the statute about other specific elements that the board has chosen to do. So it's like the payment part of that, because I actually had to pull it up, is in the first portion of this. So
Bill specifies that the full actuarial cost of service credit determined by the actuary based on methods and assumptions recommended by the actuary and approved by the Board of Trustees. And then as a lump sum or installment payments as permitted by the board. And that gave them full discretion. We may not have, upon more mature recollection, we may not have wanted to give them full discretion, but as of now, they have full discretion. They being the board. The board, yes.
And
So-
you concur with that?
I concur with that interpretation, yes. The statute as written gives the board full discretion to determine whether installment payments are appropriate, and at this point, they have decided not to exercise that discretion for the reasons I stated earlier, primarily being someone's retiring soon, you don't have an installment period. All our service purchases of all type have to be paid for before you retire.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Representative Blackus?
On that point, was there any consideration given that you know by the board on, if people have enough years left to permit installment in that situation where they might not have the complications?
No.
Thank you.
And I would just like to clarify that the 20% is a risk premium. It is a component of the full actuarial cost. It's not a penalty that we slap on top. There's no penalty involved here. This is a determination of the full actuarial cost. It has 3 components: the increased benefit by retiring earlier, the lost contributions by retiring earlier, and a risk premium to shift the risk that if the actuarial assumptions are incorrect in the long term because of differences in experience, investment performance, demographics, that risk is borne by the person buying the service and not by the system as a whole or the employers.
Representative Saitek?
Does the does the UAAL figure into this calculation?
No.
That's what I thought I understood. The other question is this. Let's say employee A pays the 400,000 somehow. Are you saying with this 2/3 number that if that person's lifespan is 8 years, that in 8 years that person will recover 2/3 of the 400,000?
Yes, in that scenario, they'll start their benefit 4 years earlier. So they have 4 years of a benefit. Let's say they've got the 20 years of service and their benefit is 50% of their pay, or 50% of 250,000. That's 125,000 times 4 years. Right there, they're making back
Thank you.
all of their cost.
Any other questions? Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So some of the terms that have come up in your response to our questions have, been along the lines of where I was going, that there are a number of assumptions that are made by the actuary and so forth, but also that by the proponents and presumably by the opponents as well. And that's the thing I am concerned about, is if you're making assumptions and either the investment, doesn't pan out as well or whatever, then you can be quite, you miss the port you're steering for because you move the tiller the wrong way at the wrong time. And because this is all subject to future developments that are projected or predicted that may not be real, I'm wondering whether we've thought it through enough and calculated it, perhaps by the opponents. And Representative Pearson has already suggested certain aspects that seem unworkable to him. So I just wonder whether we've had enough looks at this proposal to see whether we're definitely not harming the system, because if we are, then everybody is paying besides the person that has the benefit potentially.
Well, it's inherent in any actuarial calculations that your underlying assumptions may turn out not to be true. Predictions are predictions. And that is why we felt that the risk premium was appropriate to address that and assess to the individual buying the service the risk that those actuarial assumptions may not bear out over the long term.
Yeah, I would like to comment that the risk of this is significant because they're getting the earlier retirement sooner, right up front, rather than in the distant future. And the people that are likely to do this are the people that anticipate they will be living long enough to collect a larger pension for longer. That's always a risk factor in any retirement scenario, that the long-lived people will want to get bigger pensions.
Well, I believe you've hit on a good point, and that is that there is an element of what we refer to as adverse selection, and that is those who most likely to benefit are most likely to purchase. And that's one of the minor factors. In terms of the other actuarial factors, investment performance, payroll growth, demographics. We used our normal actuarial assumptions, which are set based on our actuarial studies that we do every 5 years to readjust those factors for changes. It's not like we set a factor now and those are the assumptions we're going to use for 20 years. They're revisited every 5 years, but based on the currently effective assumptions, those were the baseline that was used in these calculations, and they were tweaked around the edges to address the differences in this population. One of which is now you have people retiring at 45, not 60, like the vast majority of members. So there's a longer period of time from retirement to death over which there may be, sorry. No, I'm comparing it to group ones. What I'm saying is the actuarial assumptions took into account the fact that these members will be retiring at an earlier age, and therefore there is a longer period of time over which actuarial assumptions may turn out to be true or not true. Your window of risk that your predictions are inaccurate is longer when someone retires at 45 than when someone retires at 60. And that's all I meant to say.
Okay, Representative Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a short question. How common is it for pension plans to have this option of people to buy credit?
In this manner, we're unique because our tiered group 2 middle tier for those folks is unique when that was put into place. However, public plans across the country have various types of service purchase. Oversight, military service purchase is a very common one. Some people allow out-of-state service. We used to allow it. If a teacher from Massachusetts came here, they could take their money out of the Massachusetts plan and buy the time in our plan. We don't do that anymore. Other states do. Service purchases are very non-qualified service purchases, meaning ones that aren't based on your actual work service, but you're buying time for other reasons. We have military service, we have Peace Corps service, we have oversight, we have prior temporary service. If someone came in and worked in a temporary job and then became full-time, they could go back and buy the time for when they were in the temporary position. In that case, the member pays the full cost. So there are a variety of service purchases, and we offer most of them. And other states similarly do. But one that's exactly like this, no, because we're unique in our benefit structure that way.
Representative Saitek?
Does oversight mean, is that a synonym for employer error?
Yes, employer oversight is a failure to enroll at the time first eligible, yeah.
Definitely want to allow service time by
And
back
that
for
that is
employer.
yeah, and that's based on a contribution calculation, not an actuarial cost. That's different.
Madam, yes.
There's one more element to this, and that was the intent of Senator D'Alessandro's filing of this, is the fact that, I'm sorry. I apologize. There's one more element to this, Representative Fellows, in the fact that changes were made to the pension system retroactively. That is unique to New Hampshire as well. So you have to look at the intent here as to why Representative Goley and Senator D'Alessandro brought this forward. And that's a major element to the whole reason this bill exists.
Yes. However, the bill is not as it was originally introduced. It was significantly modified in the Senate. The House did not make any amendments. It was changed in the Senate to simply require the full actuarial cost, which is their prerogative. And whether it's the sponsor's intent or not, that's what the law is. Correct?
Except that she asked what are some of the underlying elements as to how these things come about. And I just wanted to make sure that that was a factor specifically to New Hampshire as to why this came about.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm rather disappointed that the board has decided no installment payments under any circumstances. And I would think that they should take a look at that decision, particularly for people that are buying significant amounts of time, so that, you know, they are planning to have an installment payment completed before they retire. Because that would be, if that's their plan, we should encourage them to do that, because it's, not everybody can just up and write a check for $400,000.
Right, well, certainly, I'll bring that back to the board and mention it to our benefits committee. We have a meeting scheduled coming up the first week of October. I'll put that on the agenda. Frankly, there were so many moving parts from an implementation point of view that in order to get this in place so that people can retire right away, if the purchase allows them to do that, we wanted to get it in place as soon as possible. There's a lot of programming, a lot of administrative work, changes in processes that were involved that probably put aside the installment part of it for now, because that was one more element that would have delayed implementation. But I think you make a valid point. If someone's buying 4 years and that allows them to retire 4 years early, but that's still 6 years from now, perhaps installment would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. That is, if you look at it again, Representative Lakis.
Thank you. I understand the reason for some risk premium. I'd be interested to know, the justification for the 20% number and how that was calculated, especially given that, risk of being incorrect can go both ways. And, if the several factors you mentioned ended up turning more in the to the benefit of the pension fund, then you've gotten people to pay money, and that's never going to go back to them, right? So
No.
So a little more about the details on how that 20% was developed.
Well, again, it's comprised of basically three components. and that is the investment performance, that the risk that investment performance will not be as high as estimated. And we currently have an assumed rate of return of 6.75%, which is fairly robust. We've always met that based on 1, 5, 10, 20 years back. We've met our assumed rate of return. But you don't know where markets are going in the future. The second element of that is payroll experience. And by that, I mean, built into the assumption is certain assumptions that payroll growth will be X amount, and those are the contributions that'll be coming in across the board for active employees. And if payroll growth doesn't meet that expectation, that's another risk. And the third risk was just the pure demographic risk that someone will live longer than anticipated.
Okay, thanks for that. I get that. I'm just curious how they factored in the possibility that, things could go in the other direction, that, the investment, the rate of return could be higher than expected, payrolls could grow more than expected.
Right.
And then the average lifespan of the people who chose this, were not as long as expected. So how is it, when you calculate the 20% risk premium, how is that possibility factored in to come up with? I'm just curious how that number came to be. I understand the factors that are going into it, but.
Understood. Well, I'm not an actuary, and they're very complicated mathematical formulas that they use. They run iterations and come out with a norm or an average that they feel is appropriate. And in this case, they recommended the 20%. How they do the underlying math, I'm a lawyer. I don't do math.
Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I heard you in your testimony, and you mentioned several times, and you hit the point that, and one would say, probably if they just stepped into the room, that the intention of this bill was to have people retire early. Well, was it not really? Because where the pension system had changed, these people had started, were not yet vested at the 10 years into the particular system.
Yes, Representative O'Brien.
Yes.
Let's not rehash 10 years of history.
No, but to get to the point, thank you, Madam Chair, and I do ask for very briefly, and thank you for your courtesy. But that's what really brought us here with this, because the thing is, so do you think when we write a bill, we may not get it 100% correct, but it sounds like we missed the mark if our intention was trying to help out the people that were in the process when this was first started. Would you agree with that?
I can't speak to the intent of the legislators rather, but my view was that the purpose of this bill was to allow people to buy the time so that they could retire at the same time they could have retired prior to the changes in law in 2012. The further determination was that if someone wanted to do that, they had to pay for it. And it was just a question of who pays for it and what method, and that's the
Follow up.
full actuarial cost.
Follow up, I'm going to change gears here. For clarity, I retired member of the Group 2 system. Okay. My last paycheck, the New Hampshire Retirement System, NHRS, took out a pension payment. Okay. When did I actually get that money? You say there's a loss of revenue, but when does that actually occur? In other words, is that money that my last paycheck that I had in my last contribution to the New Hampshire Retirement System, did that not go into the great pile, get reinvested, and could it perhaps make more? So the loss isn't as acute as maybe perhaps what you're portraying it?
I'm not sure I follow that question, sir.
Well, in other words, if I could
Yeah,
clarify.
Representative O'Brien.
Yeah.
The question is that a person who buys back a year of service and retires in 2022 instead of 2023 will not be making payments for a year, correct?
Okay.
That's the loss of contribution to the retirement system.
Okay.
But they are they do invest the money even from your very last paycheck. And I would like to ask when in general, a person who is retired gets back their contributions without interest or other growth. Do you know that number?
Well, yeah, when a person retires, their member account is transferred to the state annuity account. And based on the form of benefit they choose, each payment, each annuity, monthly annuity payment reduces their member account month by month by month. There's two options to do that. One is fast, one is a little bit slower. It generally takes 7 to 10 years before the member's account is exhausted. And from that point on, the state annuity fund is paying the benefit.
Yes, Representative O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to thank the chair for clarifying the direction I was going. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, I mean, that's actually better than some because I remember when I was working for a company that had a defined pension contribution, defined benefit pension, that people were recovering their contributions in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But that was some time ago.
Private plans have different actuarial assumptions that are imposed on them by the federal government under ERISA. We're not subject to that, so their numbers are different.
Okay, Representative Shu.
Can't get this any closer. I hope you can hear me all right. That 7 to 10 years to the point where you have, I guess you would call it break even with your contributions. Does that apply to both Group 1 and Group 2 individually, or are they commingled to come up with that?
It applies based on each individual, how much their benefit is and what the value of their member account is, which is based on their contributions plus the interest that was accrued to that. And the reason for that is that if someone dies before that period of time, unless they pick the absolute maximum benefit, if they're or a survivor annuity for a spouse, if they said, no, I'm going to take the second highest benefit just for myself, no survivor annuity, but if I die before my member contributions are gone, the excess gets distributed to a beneficiary that I designate. So that's an option, the balance of the remaining contributions on death. That applies if you don't have a survivor beneficiary.
Thank you. Just a quick question on that. So the amount in their account is just the straight dollars that were contributed for their pension, and is that by both them and their employer? That's the first part. And second, is that number calculated without any assumed interest on it?
That is member contributions only. The employer contributions go into the state annuity fund. The member annuity fund has individual accounts for each member. Their contributions are posted to that account, and interest is accrued and applied to that account on a monthly basis based on the lesser of the actual rate of return of the plan for investments over the last fiscal year, or 2% less than the assumed rate of return. So the range now for interest is between 0 and 4.75%.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I don't see any other obvious questions, so I'd like to thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
And I would mention to other people that if if the law as implemented doesn't meet what the intent was, I'm sure there will be attempts to fix it, because we often don't get the intent exactly right on complicated things like this.
I would leave then with this closing note that the cost is what the cost is. And if you reduce it for the person's purchasing it, someone else has got to pay it.
Yes, that was the discussion we had in this committee was that it was a benefit for them, under the circumstances they were in, to be able to buy back some time and retire earlier or at a larger pension. And it would be expensive, but for some people it's worth it. And so I'm glad you're able to at least get some people started onto it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Any other comments?
Questions?
Which do you have, Representative Zizek?
When they're finished, I have a comment.
Oh, okay. I don't see any other questions, so
I have other-
we do have some other business. We're going to vote out some of our retained, interim study bills that we've completed the study on. So thank you very much, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Thank you.
Representative Zizek, you have a comment.
Yeah, I do. This is an old comment. Rule me out of order or stop me. I'll try to keep it short. I want to blow a lot of the technical foam off this beer and get to the underlying equities. It is just, for me, it has always been wrong to pull the rug out from a police officer who had 6 years to go, or 6 months to go, and the whole thing's changed. This is the danger of having cliffs instead of ramps where things taper off. The room would be empty if we had that. The other part is, I think the state somehow should accept some responsibility or some measure, not the retirement system, but if we're giving $100 electric bills, whatever it is, we can help this middle tier because we have, quote, improved the system and in the meantime ground up the middle tier. And that seems that I'm willing to pay that price of helping them out. This is old news and I'm done.
Thank you. Anyone else before we go on to our interim study? Okay. All right. Does anyone who had an interim study have a motion? I'd like to move on House Bill 1395, which was revising the jail car process, that it's not recommended for further legislation.
Second.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd like to say that the plan in the bill as written is totally unworkable, and some of the concepts that we thought about can be implemented without legislation, so we can check it out and see if it does work, and I plan to do so in the next year. I don't think we need legislation on this issue. Representative Schmidt?
I think I agree with the chair and,
Okay. Does anyone else wish to comment on that bill? Okay, seeing none, the motion is not recommended for further legislation, and the clerk can call the roll.
This is Bill
1395.
not recommended. Representative? Gotcha. Thank you. I can make rookie mistakes no matter how long I'm here. Representative Rhodes?
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson?
Yes.
Representative Yakubovich is not here. Representative Lekis?
Yes.
Representative Allegro?
Yes.
Representative Bailey is here.
Yes.
Representative Lazara?
Yes.
Representative Santo Anastaso? Not here. Representative Goley is not here either. Okay. Representative Schuett?
Yes.
Representative Judy? No está. Okay. Representative Schmidt?
Yes.
Representative Marsh is apparently not here either. Representative Fellows?
Yes.
Representative Flutno is still in Rochester. Representative Groda?
Yes.
Where did she go?
She's hiding in the, right in plain sight, where you can't
there
see
you
her.
are. Okay. Right. And Representative O'Brien?
Yes.
And the chair?
Yes.
I didn't screw that one up.
Hooray.
2, 4, 6, 8, 10,
I'm out of-
12,
I don't know.
13, 0. 13, 0.
Just keep notes and we'll go through it. Okay. Anyone else? Representative Allegro?
We're looking to move on to the next motion, is that correct?
Yes.
On HB 1061, I would move to recommend for further legislation.
Is there a second? Well, I'll second it.
Could someone please remind us what that bill is? Sorry.
Yes, it's been a while. The title, please?
That's the one dealing with midwifery. Midwifery.
If I may, on the previous 1395, was that you making the
Yes.
motion?
That was the one I was responsible for.
And the second was?
Schmidt. Okay.
This bill is number
1061.
1051.
61.
And you made the motion, Representative Legro?
Yes, I'd like to speak to that motion very
As soon
briefly.
as we
I-
get a second,
Yeah, the second was,
Yourself.
I seconded it. Okay.
okay, sorry I'm slow on the
No,
uptake here.
Schmidt.
but-
Representative Allegro, you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, the underlying premise, I mean, the subcommittee's decision was unanimous, but the underlying premise was that this should be within the framework of the amendment that was proposed, 0948H.
Oh,
09.
Expand on that a little bit, on the amendment.
Yeah.
Remind us.
The amendment had to do with the composition of the board. The legislation originally changed it so that the midwives would be in a minority, and the amendment restored one midwife position, and it was 0948H.
Okay, thank you. I don't have anything to say about it. Anyone else want to discuss it? What? Yeah, okay. Okay, I don't see any other discussion, so the motion is to pursue further legislation. And the clerk can call the roll.
Representative Rhodes,
Yes.
the clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson,
Yes.
Representative Lekis,
Yes.
Representative Allegro,
Yes.
Representative Bailey,
Yes.
Representative Lansara,
Yes.
Representative Schuett,
Yes.
Representative Schmidt,
Yes.
Representative Fellows,
Yes.
Representative Grota,
Yes.
Representative O'Brien,
Yes.
and the chair.
Yes.
Same 13-0.
Okay. And for those whose memory about interim study bills is not as good as it might be, the recommendation is simply whether we think it deserves further legislation, and any member can bring forth that legislation if it's necessary. So. Or any other legislation, yes, well, that's always, it's full option. That's always true.
Universally true.
But if you recommend further legislation, it's a kind of a good idea to put it in yourself. Representative Fellows?
This is just a process question. Is there a report somewhere that says why?
Yes. Each person making the motion will be sending me a blurb on why they recommend further legislation, and that will be published in the calendar sometime just before the election, usually.
Yeah, the reports are due usually November 1st. I think that's the time frame still. And so they would appear sometime between that and the election usually.
Yeah, and
Well, there's not much time between November 1st and the election.
it's the 8th this year, so there's a solid week.
Wow.
And you had said anybody who recommends for legislation owes you a blurb. I assume people owe you a blurb if they
No,
recommend
the
against.
person who makes the motion owes the
Either
blurb.
way.
The person who recommends legislation is normally expected to produce said legislation.
But if the recommendation of the subcommittee or of this committee is not to offer further legislation, I assume there's still a blurb?
There's still a blurb,
Okay, thank
yes.
you.
I'm writing one. All right. Anyone else that have one that they think is through?
Madam Chair,
Rather,
I
Mr.
have one for
Brodak.
House Bill, I think it's 1429, the establishment, massage establishment
Okay.
licensing.
Yes, your motion.
My motion is to recommend for further legislation.
Okay, then moved by Representative Groda, seconded by Schmidt. Do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, the committee met and, subcommittee met, excuse me, and it was thought that the bill could be refined to include local authorities, and we felt that that would be that would be important to add to the next bill.
Okay, Representative Schmidt, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had a very active subcommittee, both in terms of members of the legislature, of EDNA, but also members of the OPLC were here. And seems perfectly obvious that this is an ongoing concern of considerable significance in the cities and towns affected, such as Derry. In the meantime, Merrimack, I understand, has 5 or 6 of these, what I can refer to as massage parlors. And I was somewhat disconcerted to discover that even Dover now has one establishment that I pass by on a regular basis on my way to go grocery shopping. You would think it's just an ordinary residence, and yet this illegal activity is going on. And in the case of Derry, I've had several discussions with the leadership of the town administration, and they are very unhappy with the fact that the state has no leverage in statute to both license legitimate therapy massage establishments and thereby to have a means of going against these, what I could refer to as massage parlors, which are violating the current statute of health and safety conditions, sanitation, food service, and so forth in these places. They could do that, but the police, for example, are not at all interested because it's just a misdemeanor. The employees in the establishments get bailed out right away, sent away to other towns. Sometimes even the management changes, but the business goes right forward, and it's just a cost of doing business for them to pay the fines and so forth for the misdemeanors. So the police really are not interested in pursuing this because it's basically a waste of their time. But the proposed legislation would give legitimate therapeutic massage establishments some standing. In some places, they're seen as equivalent or similar to massage parlors, which they are not. So it's an insult to them to categorize them in that fashion. But that because of the clear fact that the massage parlors are not performing therapeutic massage, the employees are not licensed. They can't get licensed to do therapeutic massage because they don't have any training, and that's not what they're doing. And so it would be an opportunity for OPLC to begin to enforce simple standards, which they're somewhat reluctant to do. But after discussion with the executive director and so forth, they recognize that this is, a viable means of taking some form of action against these massage parlors. So I definitely think that further legislation is appropriate.
Madam Chair, if I may, the legislation merely states that massage establishments will be licensed. This will give OPLC the authority to inspect the businesses to see that the people there are licensed, and then, and therefore, if there are issues that require further action, the legislation says that, well, the future legislation would say that local authorities would be involved.
All right. Anyone else have a comment? Representative Rhodes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to point out that when we had the original hearing on this bill, it was really presented as this was a local issue, and that was kind of the narrative that had taken over, in my opinion, of that hearing. And then at our subcommittee hearing, it was really brought to our attention that this is actually a statewide situation. It is not just a local issue. And the services that are being offered really are licensed services, where that was not the case in what we found, what was really happening. So I actually am in support after the work session that we had on it of future legislation. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Bailey.
My original concern with when we started with all this was that this was kind of a licensure as law enforcement as opposed to oversight of expertise. And I haven't heard anything change, really. So I would not recommend this.
Representative Sytek.
Based on my experience in Salem, which has had exactly zero problems handling this locally, I'm going to vote against it for that reason. Not because they shouldn't be inspected, but I think that it can, with respect to Representative Rhodes, be handled locally.
And I have to agree with the last two speakers. I don't see why all of the hundreds of massage establishments in the state need to be licensed because some of the larger cities can't enforce health and safety requirements on the facilities in their towns. And as we heard, Salem is not one of them. They have a local ordinance that they enforce, and they don't have a problem. So I think that if there is further legislation needed, it is more on the lines of clarifying that localities have the authority to license and inspect, rather than having every place in the state contribute to helping a few towns enforce their business.
Madam Chair, are you referring to enabling legislation to allow local municipalities to perform a function that is assumed to be a state required function?
No, I'm going to authorizing legislation to have localities enforce their health and safety requirements, which is what I believe to be the main issue. Representative Schuett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong, but don't the localities technically have that right now without?
I would have thought so.
So what would that accomplish?
Representative Blackus and then Sytek.
Right, I was going to make a similar comment, and I'm going to vote against recommending legislation unless, somebody brings up evidence that dairies operating illegally or outside of their authority. We have an existence proof that it can be handled locally today, and I don't think there's a need for further legislation.
Representative Sytek?
There is a need, I believe there's a need for further legislation, because when I talked to our health officer, he was tiptoeing around whether he really had the authority to do this. And it would be awfully nice to have state law permit him to do this. So I'd like to see something here, and I'd like it done. I'd like to enable the locals, like they do restaurants.
Right, Representative Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a recollection, which could be inaccurate, that last term we had a bill that had to do with licensing massage establishments, but the bill that we had something to do about excluding those that were just a single therapist. Did that pass or what? So I'm trying to figure out what happened here.
I don't believe it passed.
it passed the House, but it did not, got tabled in the Senate as a result of the pandemic. They couldn't have any hearings, so
Yeah.
it died in Senate. Passed the House.
So
CSO.
as a follow-up, the subcommittee, did they have any discussion about that situation? Like if we're going to license them or did they discuss excluding those really small one-person shops?
The bill that was submitted to our original committee is the same as the one that was submitted originally and passed. So yes, it does address those.
Okay. Further comments or questions? Representative Schuett.
Thank you. I'll just further point out, for the benefit of committee members who may not realize that even if this does not get recommended, anyone can put the legislation in again next year.
As a matter of fact, I've noticed that Representative Groda has an LSR already submitted that appears to address this issue. So our recommendation is somewhat moot. Yes, that's a good word for it. Yes, it's a sense of the committee.
I would
Alright.
never let anyone on this committee feel that they are toothless or hopeless.
No, we will, it seems that there will be some legislation which after Representative Groda is happy with it, will come to us and get thoroughly mangled. Exactly, Representative Schmidt. That's exactly the point. All right. Any other comments? No? Okay. In that case, the motion is recommended for further legislation, and the clerk can call the roll.
Representative Rhodes.
Yes.
The clerk votes no. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Lekis.
No.
Representative Allegro.
No.
Representative Bailey.
No.
Representative Lanzara.
Yes.
Representative Schuett.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
Yes.
Representative Fellows.
Yes.
Representative Groda.
Yes.
Representative O'Brien.
Yes.
And the chair.
No.
Okay, 2, 4, 5. 2, 4, 6. 8 to 5 in favor of recommended.
All right. If anyone wishes to write a minority report, feel free.
No appetite.
Yeah, I'm not going to. All right. Does anyone else have a bill that they think we are through studying?
Well, don't we have to get them all?
Oh, Representative O'Brien. No, we can't get them all because at least one of them, Representative Lekis, is,
Yeah.
although actually you know what your recommendation is going to be. I recommend.
Well, we
Thank you, Madam
Representative
Chairman.
O'Brien.
My question is through the chair to Representative Sitek. He did chair the committee with the building inspectors. Are we ready for that? Do we make a decision on that?
Building inspectors?
Duplexes.
Yes, I think that, Madam Chair, I think that was your bill.
It was my bill, yes.
Since I've already written the blurb.
What's your recommendation, Representative Sitek?
What's the bill number, by the way?
1191.
Who's the original sponsor? You?
Okay, not recommended. Do I have
Is there a second? Representative Sitek recommends not recommended for further legislation on House Bill 1191. Representative O'Brien
I'll second.
seconds. Okay. Representative Sitek?
there is a good idea here, but would take a lot of work that I'm not willing to do. May- Maybe somebody else, well, maybe someone else is, but it seems that the cure is quite involved here. You have the fundamental issue I have a personal problem even with doing work in your own house. You have your own family to contend with. You don't own them. And if you're incompetent, you shouldn't be allowed to do electrical or gas work, especially gas work. Electrical work, you know. So, but I have, putting that aside, well, can I put it aside? It's part of the formulation of how I feel. You're doing work in somebody else in a duplex. You could affect the health and safety, a rubber stamp word, of yourself or your family that's in it, bystanders to the work that's being done in the duplex. Now, basically, if you're competent, I'm not saying necessarily licensed, I'm not sure how you would handle a situation. Look, I'm competent to do this work, meaning I know when I'm over my head, I stop. I get the pros. But I know I'm not going to be cutting any gas pipes and letting the play. That's just out of the question, all right? So this is just simply too complicated to try to thread the needle of a good solution. So as written, it should not go. Can it be saved? If someone wants to do a lot of work, I think it can be. There's something here, as I've said, the path to competence, if not licensure, which should be true for anybody working in any house. So on the grounds that it's simply too complicated to make it work as written, I'm going to move, I have moved, that it not as in this form, not be recommended for further legislation.
Okay,
So, there I am.
Representative O'Brien wishes to speak to the
Thank you,
second.
Madam Chair. When Representative Sitek, when we held this particular committee meetings, one of the representatives showed up were members of the inspection services for the individual communities. And currently, right now, state law basically says if you live in a single-family home, a man's home is his castle. So if the homeowner who lives in a single occupancy decides to do this type of work, could he, in the worst-case scenario, jeopardize his family? Yes, but he wouldn't inadvertently jeopardize what I would say the innocent. And who are the innocent? I think when we go into a situation and agree to pay rent, such as in a duplex or a multifamily home, we're at the whim and hopes, in good trust and good nature, that the landlord has done his due diligence and has done the proper wiring, and that the like something as very simple as the hot water system is properly vented and everything else. Yes, there is a need, and there is a lot of communities in the state of New Hampshire that do not have building inspectors, and I can understand the wants and needs of this particular bill. But in communities where there's a lot of rental occupancies, I felt that it did need it, so therefore I supported the committee with the recommendation not to support this.
Representative Blackus?
Thank you. Well, I supported the original bill. I'll go along with the not recommend further legislation because I don't see it's likely any legislation I could support coming out of it more than anything else. And just in response to the concerns about people doing work on their own single-family home, the question is, where do you draw the line? I mean, does the government... People can do many things to endanger their families, from how they mow the lawn, drive the car, and raise their children. And I would not accept government making decisions on competencies in those or many other areas.
Okay. Yeah, as a sponsor, I have come to realize the bill was too broad, but I think we ought to be looking very hard at the places where we say doing plumbing work without a license is illegal. Because yes, you don't want to have an inexperienced or unqualified person designing a complete plumbing system, but replacing a sink, there are a significant number of things that fall under the plumbing code that any reasonably handy person can do safely and effectively. And I think we ought to be looking at the exemptions rather than where they're being done. That's my point, but,
Well, that's terrific. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
okay. All right, any other comments? Okay, Representative Schuett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hearing the likelihood of some legislation coming forward. And I'm just curious if there's some way that it can be crafted to allow the board to make those kinds of exceptions. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's a thought. But it depends on somebody willing to do the work, as Representative Sitek said. And I'm booked a little heavily this year.
About letting the board make those exceptions, I think I would like to hear the board make recommendations to us and we put them in law, because the recommendation may be you may turn on and off the hot water faucet.
Yeah.
I want to, they may have a vested interest in keeping their domain smaller than we might like. This is a tough area because I want competent people to be able to do stuff like this, but I also understand the need for licensing, even though I'm Wild West, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
this is a tough area.
All right, anyone else? Representative Blackus.
Yeah, I'm just torn on how to vote because it's more a message, I guess, that's being sent than anything else at this point. So I'll make a decision when I vote, I guess.
It's coming up.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, clerk can call the roll.
The motion is not HB 1191 is not will not be recommended for further legislation. That is the motion. Representative Rhodes.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Pearson.
Yes.
Representative Lekis.
No.
Should have waited. Representative Allegro.
Yes.
Representative Bailey.
Yes.
Representative Lanzara.
Yes.
Representative Schuett.
Yes.
Representative Schmidt.
Yes.
Representative Fellows.
Yes.
Representative Grote.
Yes.
Representative O'Brien.
Yes.
And the chair.
No.
Okay. I'm going to 11-2. 11-2.
Not as written, but
Right.
considering some of the issues. Okay. Anyone else? Representative Goley and Marsh have bills and they're not here. Representative Grote, you have one or two also?
I think I had Senate Bill 230,
Yes.
but I have no recollection of what that is.
In that case, we don't want to discuss it today.
Can we, I mean, our recommendation was not to recommend, but I cannot remember.
Good enough for me.
So I'm
that was the
sorry.
medical spas.
That's 1441.
Oh, 230 is body art. Licensing tattoo parlors.
I'm sorry.
Okay, well, if you-
I cannot remember. I have to go back. Oh, wait.
okay. In that case,
This is what I'm looking for. Oh, no. No. Can we just put those two off until?
No.
Could we please put those two off until the next time? I promise I will be sharper.
okay, well, I think that,
You promise to be way sharp.
yeah,
Do I promise to be way sharper?
okay.
yeah.
So I don't think we have any, we should take up 1312 because we have other bills that we can't take up because the people aren't here. So we will have to meet once more before the end of the month. That's October, yeah.
End of October.
And
Before
we're
the end of-
meeting because we have other things to do, not because I couldn't remember.
No, there's,
Okay, thank you.
We have 5 other bills that we had kept in interim study, and we don't have someone here to make a motion on, or have someone ready to make a motion on any of them.
Yeah. And 1312, we have hopefully our last meeting on the 28th of this month. So we're not ready.
And I will state, Representative Marsh told me he had another commitment this morning. I think he had indicated he was going to write a statement on 1566 because the committee should be aware another bill did pass with this, but obviously
We
he
can
couldn't
take it
be
up
here
when,
today. Yeah, when we
on
meet
the
next.
we meet. Okay, so Representative Allegro, SciTech, and Grota owe me a short report on why we should take the action you recommend, and I'll write one on mine. And congratulations to everyone for surviving the primaries. Representative SciTech.
I would like to remind the committee that if you want to sign in for your heavenly reward, the clipboard is up here. And I have no idea what this is for, but it's a custom. Here it is. No room service. It's self-service.